This morning I'd like to be talking, or at least begin talking about our voice. The lesson for this morning is about the voice of the Lord. I want to begin talking about our voice, though, and what James has to say about that. James chapter 3, start in verse 5. We're going to skip down in just a moment. James chapter 3 and verse 5. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, yet it boasts of great things. Skip down to verse 8. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and our Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessings and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be this way. Does a fountain send out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Nor can salt water produce fresh. Our voices, our words, carry a lot of weight. Because of the way we are and who we are, we all seem to seek out a level of affirmation. We see this in our children. They seek it from their parents. As they're going throughout life learning what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do, you can see it in their eyes. Young adults seek it from their peers and from their elders, hoping to know that their actions are right with how culture is supposed to be, how they're supposed to be acting. Parents seek it from their children. When they look at their children as they are parenting and going through life, they want to make sure I'm doing the right thing for my children, for the ones that I love, the ones I'm supposed to be guiding and teaching. They are seeking some affirmation from them. And lastly, our elderly. They seek it from their peers and the youth. They want to make sure that they are still being relevant to one another and relevant and active in the world to the young people. And this is all done through words, through actions and sharing with one another. But James warns us here of exactly what the power of our voice and our words can be. We can either use our words to build one another up, to make each other stronger, a more cohesive unit, or it can tear each other down and break apart into nothing. But while our words are powerful to us and carry so much weight with each and every one of us, they pale in comparison to the voice of the Lord. So turn over, if you will, to Psalm 29. Psalm 29. So we talk about the voice of the Lord. If you weren't aware, in our supplements, there's actually a song called The Voice of the Lord. And it gets its roots from this psalm. And yes, we are going to sing it later. The words will be up on the PowerPoint. But I want us to look and analyze this psalm and try to pull something from it this morning as we get a rich understanding, I think, of what the voice of the Lord says here. The psalm begins as such. Ascribe to the Lord, O sons of the mighty. Ascribe to the God of glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due to his name. Worship the Lord in holy array. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. Yes, the Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon, and he makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord hews out flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer to calve and strips the forest bare. And in his temple, everything says, glory. And the Lord sits as king at the flood. Yes, the Lord sits as king forever. The Lord will give strength to his people, and the Lord will bless his people with peace. It's a beautiful psalm and really paints a wonderful picture of God here. But David begins this section with a calling to worship. He uses the word ascribe, and that's not really a word we use very often in our common tongue. The word means to attribute to or to give credit. So I want to kind of maybe modernize these first couple verses for us. As David is making a call to his assembly, calling to worship. He says, "You are the Lord's. Credit yourself to him and to his account. We belong to him. Give him the glory and honor that is due him. Be reverent and respectful of him in our worship." As we come to worship, be reverent and respectful. May our thoughts be holy and pure as we come before him. David begins this psalm with a wonderful calling out and a reminder to the people of just exactly what they've come to do. But then he makes this unique transition. When he gives a description of God here, he's doing it based on really what little they know about God. From what they would have at this time, they probably would have only had the first few books of what we call the Old Testament. Would have had the creation accounts, the few narratives that go along with post that in the book of Genesis. They would have had the law of Moses and a little bit of history that went with that. And you get really a small picture, I think, of what God is there, at least compared to what we have now. But David uses the tools he has, the relationship he has with God, to try to paint a picture for the people that have come to worship their God, to try to maybe make a more relationship level thing for them to hold on to. But he's using it through the one tactic that they for sure have learned about God with, his voice. We do the same thing when we call somebody on the phone. If you've never met somebody and you call them for the first time, at least I do this, I try to paint a picture in my head of what this individual may look like based on what their voice sounds like. Generally, if it's a man, the deeper the voice, I just imagine a bigger, taller person. Softer a woman's voice, I can paint this image in my head of a beautiful woman. But we do that same thing when we talk and we hear the voice, and David is trying to help them accomplish that. But we are blessed, though, to have the complete Word of God, which paints really a full picture of God for us. But I would like for us this morning to try to put ourselves in the shoes of those who had assembled that morning to hear David's psalm for the first time and to try to hear what God is like just from his voice. So if you will close your eyes one more time and listen to verses 3 through 9. I'm going to read it again. Try to put yourselves in their shoes. The voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord is over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. Yes, the Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon, and he makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a wild young ox. The voice of the Lord hews out flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer to calf and strips the forest bare. And in his temple everything cries out, glory. We see through these short few verses, at least I think we see 5 different parts of God's voice, characteristics of Him through the voice. The first is this. The voice of the Lord is a voice of creation. We see that in verse 3. He's upon the waters. The voice of God thunders. It's over many waters. Look at Genesis chapter 1, a voice of creation. We see in Genesis chapter 1, multiple times, every time the Lord creates something, it begins with, "Then God said," using His voice as the key to creation, as the molding tool for how He's going to make the world. And then in verse 26, He does something rather spectacular. Verse 26, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" In His voice here, He says, mankind, you're going to be special. You're going to rule over all of the things I have created. And you're going to share something with me that nothing else carries. You are going to be made and have my likeness, our likeness. But this does not necessarily refer to our physical form. What is the likeness of God really? It's the Spirit. It's the Spirit of the Lord. If we're each created in His likeness, He's saying, I'm giving you a soul. I'm giving you something special to cherish. His image, our image, is spirit, and we are formed like Him. And it was His, and it should always have been His and been given back to Him. Yet He gives us the freedom, though, of how we're going to use our souls, whether it to be in service to Him, as it should be, or service to us, misusing this wonderful blessing of creation that He gave us for His purpose or for our own. The Lord has a voice of creation. But while He shares a voice of creation, on the other end of the spectrum, we are also aware of His voice of destruction. In the law of Moses, in Deuteronomy 27 and 28, He gives us the blessings and the curses based on how they treat their relationship with Him, how they are using that gift of the soul. If they love the Lord their God and make Him first in their lives, first in all things, great, abundant, beautiful things will happen. Deuteronomy 28, verses 11 through 13. Reads, "The Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the offspring of your body, in the offspring of your beasts, and in the produce of your ground, in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open for you His good storehouse, the heavens, to give rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hand. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. The Lord will make you the head and not the tail, and you only will be above, and you will not be underneath." He paints this wonderful picture for them, saying, if you follow me, keep me first, you will be so blessed. The other nations will come to you seeking sustenance, seeking everything from you. But if you turn from me, there are some very dire consequences. We're not going to read them because there's so many of them. But through the prophet Joel, he paints a really terrible picture for them. What is coming because they failed to keep the relationship with Him. Joel chapter 2. Joel chapter 2. verses 1 through 11. And I actually have to thank Ron for showing me this painting of what the Lord is going to say here. His class has been fantastic. If it's recorded, I highly recommend you listen to it. The book of Joel, chapter 2 and verse 1. Says, "Blow a trumpet in Zion and sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. Surely it is near. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, as the dawn is spread over the mountains. So there is a great and mighty people. There have never been anything like it, nor will there be any again after it." And as he goes down, he gives a description of what this army is going to be like. How strong and mighty they are, how unified they act together, how they're going to scale over the walls, climb over your houses, trample through your roofs, go in and rip you from the land. But look in verse 11. "The Lord utters his voice before his army," these mighty men that are coming to rip you from your home, Judah, Israel. "Surely his camp is very great, for strong is he who carries out his word. The day of the Lord is indeed great and very awesome." Again, this army comes in to destroy at the voice of the Lord, at his command and under his plans. The voice of the Lord brings destruction if we do not continue to share in the wonderful things and share in our relationship with him. But while he brings a voice of creation and a scary voice of destruction, at the same time, in Psalm 29, we also see a voice of compassion, a voice of joy and of safety. Look at verse 9. "The voice of the Lord makes the deer to calve." If you're not aware, when it's time for animals to have their young, they don't just go anywhere. They try to find the safest glen, the safest hollow, a place where they know their young will not be attacked by predators, have a chance to get its literal feet under it, so it has a chance to survive. David is saying here, when the Lord speaks, when you hear his voice, there's a net of safety. It's a safe place to be. It's when the voice of the Lord speaks, deer feel it is safe and appropriate to bear their fawns. If you will, reflect with me on Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19. 1 Kings chapter 19, we kind of come into the middle of the story. The previous chapter, Elijah has just done the marvelous, mighty work for God. Coming in, telling Israel, you have a choice. It's either Baal or it's God. Choose for yourselves, and we're going to put them both to test. And the prophets of Baal do their little show, and after hours, nothing happens. But Elijah speaks just once to God, and he proves to the people that he is God. He is their God, and they should worship him. And they literally cleanse the religious house there. Yet he incurs the wrath of Jezebel because of this. And he hears her verdict, that as soon as she can, Elijah will be dead. And what does he do? He runs. He literally heads for the hills to get away from her. But the Lord shows compassion to him. Start in verse 4 of 1 Kings chapter 19. He says, "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, 'It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am not better than my fathers.' And he lay down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him, and he said, 'Arise and eat.' And he looked, and behold, there was at his head bread, a cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." The angel of the Lord came and showed compassion on Elijah. He begged for death. Yet the angel says, "It's not time yet. You have more to do." And he took it as though I need to get further away because Jezebel's hot on my heels. So he continues to run and he ends up at Horeb. And start in verse 9. Then he came there to a cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah says, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord was passing by, and a great and strong wind was rending the mountain and breaking it into pieces, the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of gentle blowing. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in a mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The Lord could have come in any of those powerful, shaking, burning forms to stand before Elijah and call judgment, saying, "You've been weak. You are being selfish. Why do you forget me and my power?" Yet instead he comes as a gentle breeze with words of encouragement. Why have you run, Elijah? He comes as a soft, gentle, and loving breeze because the Lord knew Elijah needed compassion and encouragement right now. Because the Lord shows his compassion, Elijah has many good things to do and sets up the next line of prophets. The Lord uses his voice to show compassion to his people. Now let's skip over to the New Testament. As we see, the Lord uses a voice of power. We see David in the psalm literally say, "The voice of the Lord is powerful. It breaks the cedars of Lebanon, mighty trees, a village and city known for its strong trees, causing the world to shake." There is power in the voice of the Lord. There's something even more powerful to come in the future. In John chapter 11, I want us to look at the story of Lazarus. Start in chapter 11 and verse 23. As the voice of the Lord speaks here. And Jesus says to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again at the resurrection in the last days." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this? Martha, do you believe in the power of the voice of the Lord? Here, as Jesus goes throughout this story, you actually see the first three voices of the Lord show up in this story. The voice of creation as he brings Lazarus back to life, calling out later on. Lazarus, come forth, bringing life back to him. The voice of destruction as he, before all these people around him, shatter their understanding of death, showing him that he has the voice of power over death. And he shows a voice of compassion in his prayer. Father, I thank that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I say it, so that they may believe that you sent me. A voice of compassion to the people, a voice of compassion to the sisters that the brother that they've lost, they thought was dead, will now rise again. The first three all lead up to this voice of power. He shows here that he is God, that his voice is all-encompassing. It's the same voice that's been speaking since creation and choosing the nation as his own. We also see out of Jesus a voice of hope. Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24. And that's how the Psalm of David ends, is a voice of hope for the people. David had no idea what was going to lie in store for his people, but he leaves them a glimmer of hope at the end of the psalm, promising them that if you are counted among God's people, you will be blessed and you will find peace. The apostles here were so confused. They did not know what to do because Jesus died upon the cross. Their hope, their understanding, it's all been shattered. Everything they've invested in the last 3 years, gone. It's been torn away, pierced, laid behind a giant stone, which has now been sealed shut with wax so that none should open it. But then they receive word that the body is gone. To them, the impossible has happened. And then the impossible happens again because they hear such a reassuring voice. As Jesus comes and stands before them, to use this final voice, the voice of hope. Start in verse 44. Luke 24, verse 44. Now he said to them, "These are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things which are written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Christ would suffer and rise again from the dead on the third day, and that repentance for forgiveness of sins would be proclaimed in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things. And behold, I am sending forth the promise of my Father upon you." He reassures them with his voice, the voice of creation, destruction, compassion, and power and hope. That I have been for you then, I'm here for you now, and I will be with you forever. Leaving records for us, the later, that there's still a hope and a voice for us. While the voice of the Lord does not speak directly to us today, we can still feel his impact and can learn so much about him from his written word. But sometimes it's good to go back and to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to try to see where they stand. So if you will, let us sing the voice of the Lord. The voice of the Lord. Do me. The voice of the Lord is over waters, God of all glory thunders. The voice of the Lord is filled with power. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes her skip like a calf. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. It shakes the desert sand. Oh, listen and hear as the silence is shattered. With all of creation rejoice. Oh, listen and hear, for one day all the nations will bow at the sound of his voice. The voice of the Lord is powerful and mighty. Let us remember that and reflect on that today as we end in prayer and then a verse of a final song.